She played piano with a blind boy, unaware his mafia boss. Dad was standing behind the door. The security guard paused his midnight rounds, tilting his head as delicate piano notes floated through the luxury high-rise's empty corridors. The music shouldn't exist at midnight in a building where most residents were either asleep or away, especially not from the rarely used music room on the 20th floor. His weathered hand brushed against the holster at his hip, a habit from years of vigilance as he moved silently toward the haunting melody. The notes carried emotion that seemed impossible from mere hammers striking strings, sorrow and hope intertwined like old friends finding each other after years apart. At the partially open door, he held his breath, peering through the crack to see two figures at the grand piano. A small boy, no more than 9, fingers dancing across the keys with uncanny precision, despite eyes that stared unseeing at the ceiling, lost in a world of sound rather than sight. Beside him sat a woman in the gray uniform of the building's cleaning staff, her hands guiding his occasionally, then pulling away to let him soar alone. Her face transformed completely from the quiet, almost invisible person who moved through hallways with lowered eyes, now alive with pride as she watched her young student. The security guard recognized the boy as the son of Mr. Bianchi, who occupied the penthouse suite, the man whose name was whispered rather than spoken, whose business associates arrived with subtle bulges beneath tailored jackets, the boy who had lost his mother last winter, and whose father had buried himself in work ever since. He should report this unauthorized use of the facilities, especially involving the son of the building's most powerful resident. Instead, he stepped back silently, deciding some rules deserved to be broken, especially when broken things were being healed by the very breaking. The cleaner, Nora, felt the music flow through her fingertips like water returning to a dried riverbed. 5 years since she'd touched ivory keys. 5 years since the accident that took her husband and her career in one cruel moment, leaving her with bills, a broken wrist, and broken dreams. Music isn't just sound, she whispered to the boy as they paused between pieces, her words forming the gentle cadence of poetry rather than conversation. It's emotion, it's color, it's everything you feel but cannot see. It's how your heart speaks when words aren't enough. The boy, Theodore, smiled in her direction, his unseeing eyes somehow finding hers with uncanny precision. Dad used to say Mom played like angels were borrowing her hands, he whispered, his small fingers tracing the piano's wooden edge with familiarity born of touch rather than sight. "And do you miss playing with her?" Nora asked, already knowing the answer from the heaviness in his small shoulders, the way he sought solace in the one thing that still connected him to his mother. The language of loss needed no translation. She spoke it fluently herself. Theodore's fingers found the keys again, playing a simple melody that grew in complexity with each repetition. "Dad doesn't come to the music room anymore. He says it hurts too much," he said, his voice so small it almost disappeared beneath the notes. "But music is the only place I can still find her." Nora glanced at her watch, 1 a.m., knowing she risked her job with every minute spent here instead of finishing her shift. But watching Theodore play, seeing him navigate darkness through sound, she couldn't bring herself to extinguish this small flame of joy in his life. "Your hands are different from Mom's," Theodore observed, his head tilted as if listening to something far away. "Rougher, like Dad's, but you play the same notes she did, the ones that make the air feel different, like it's dancing all around us." "Some people see with their eyes," Nora replied, placing her calloused hands over his small ones, guiding him through a difficult passage. "But you listen with such attention that you hear what others miss, the spaces between notes where all the feeling lives." Neither of them noticed the shadow that paused outside the door, the tall figure whose hand had reached for the handle, then frozen in place. Neither saw how he leaned against the wall, eyes closed, transported by a melody he had forbidden himself to remember. Daylight revealed Nora's other life, apartment 4B, in a building across town that leaked when it rained, where she stretched a single parent's salary to cover rent and piano lessons for her daughter. Morning light traced the exhaustion on her face as she prepared breakfast for 6-year-old Sophie, who practiced scales on their second-hand upright. "Mom, are your hands still hurting from cleaning?" Sophie asked, noticing her mother's wince as she poured cereal. The question hung between them, innocent yet piercing, a child's observation cutting through adult pretenses like a laser through fog. Nora flexed her fingers, remembering when they flew across concert halls rather than scrubbing other people's floors. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the space between what she had been and what she had become, a gap wider than the years that created it. "Just tired, sunshine," she answered, placing a worn bracelet on her wrist, the last gift her husband gave her, engraved with words that seemed like mockery some days. "Music finds a way." She wondered if he had known how long and winding that way would be. Across town, in the penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of the luxury building, Angelo Bianchi reviewed security footage with cold precision. His empire demanded constant vigilance, enemies circling like wolves around a wounded bear since his wife's death had momentarily weakened him. The screen showed Theodore sneaking to the elevator alone, a security breach that sent ice through his veins. Following the boy's journey to the music room, Angelo's finger hovered over the fast-forward button, then froze as the cleaning woman entered the frame, watched his son for several minutes, then approached. He expected to feel rage seeing someone touch his son without permission, but instead felt something crack inside his chest as the woman gently guided Theodore's hands to the piano. The security footage had no sound, but he didn't need it. He could see the music in his son's face, happiness returning like spring after endless winter. "Mr. Bianchi, your associate is waiting in the study," his assistant interrupted, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had witnessed too many explosions of temper. She noticed the footage on the screen but knew better than to comment on anything involving the boss's son. Angelo closed the laptop with deliberate calm, straightening his immaculate tie as he rose. "Find everything you can about the cleaning woman who works the 20th floor," he instructed, his voice betraying nothing of the storm behind his eyes. "Everything. From birth certificate to breakfast preferences." The underboss, Paolo, noticed his distraction during their meeting, misinterpreting it as disinterest in the territory dispute he was describing. "The Albanians need to understand their place," he insisted, leaning forward with barely contained aggression. "We should send a message they won't forget." Angelo turned to the window, watching the city spread beneath him like a kingdom he no longer desired. Since losing his wife, violence had lost its taste, power its allure, leaving only emptiness, and the responsibility of raising a son who lived in perpetual darkness. "We do nothing until I decide," he responded, dismissing Paolo with a wave that tolerated no argument. Alone again, he opened a hidden panel in his office wall, revealing a portrait of a woman at a grand piano, her eyes closed in rapture as she played, a small boy sitting beside her in wonder. "She found him, Elise," he whispered to the portrait, tracing his wife's face with reverent fingertips. "Someone is teaching our son to play again, and I don't know whether to thank her or fear what else she might awaken in him, and in me." Theodore's small hands trembled with excitement as Nora guided him through the building's service corridors, their secret path to the music room. "Dad thinks I'm napping with Mrs. Green watching me," he confided, his unseeing eyes bright with the thrill of their shared conspiracy. 3 weeks of hidden lessons had transformed him, the withdrawn, silent child blossoming like a flower that had finally found sunlight. His fingers grew more confident on the keys, his posture straighter, his laughter coming easily now where before there had been only careful politeness. "Today we'll try something new," Nora promised, unlocking the music room with the key she wasn't supposed to have. The weight of discovery hung over her like a guillotine blade, but the joy in Theodore's face made the risk worthwhile, a gamble against odds that had never favored her. What neither knew was that Angelo had been watching them for days, tracking their movements through security cameras he monitored personally now. Each session he observed silently, a voyeur to his son's happiness, conflicted between interruption and allowing this forbidden connection to continue. The dossier on his desk told him everything about Nora Williams, former concert pianist whose career ended after a car accident killed her husband and damaged her wrist. Single mother working 3 jobs, significant medical debt, daughter showing musical promise, but lessons stretching an already impossible budget. Angelo ran his fingers over the grainy photo of Nora on stage from years ago, her face alight with the same passion he now saw when she taught his son. He recognized the look, had loved it in his wife's eyes, that transcendence that came from complete surrender to music. "Theodore asked about you today," Mrs. Green reported during their evening briefing, her voice carefully neutral as she delivered information she knew might displease him. "He wanted to know if you ever played the piano like Mother did, or if you just listened." The question pierced Angelo like a blade between ribs, the painful truth that his son knew so little about him beyond his absences. Once, they had played together, father and son beside Elise, a family bound by more than blood and business. connected by harmonies that made sense of the world's discord. "The cleaning woman is getting too close to your son," Paolo warned later that evening, placing surveillance photos on Angelo's desk, with the self-satisfaction of someone who believes they've uncovered a betrayal. "She could be working for our enemies, using the boy to get information." Angelo's hand moved faster than thought, fingers closing around Paolo's throat with precision born of years enforcing his will through fear. "My son is not a topic for your speculation," he whispered, the deadly calm in his voice more frightening than any shouted threat could be. He released his underboss, straightening his own cuffs as Paolo gasped for air. "Theodore has been happier these past weeks than in the year since his mother died," Angelo continued conversationally, as though discussing the weather rather than matters of life and death. "I want to know why before I decide what happens next." That night, unable to sleep, Angelo descended to the 20th floor, drawn by an irresistible force to the music room. Through the crack in the door, he watched Nora cleaning the space after hours, her movements efficient, yet reverent around the piano, occasionally stopping to play a few notes. The melody she played pierced him, Elise's favorite nocturne, the one she had been teaching Theodore before her death. Angelo's hand rose to his chest, where an unfamiliar ache bloomed, the sensation of something long frozen beginning to crack beneath spring's persistent warmth. He planned to confront her, to demand explanations for her interference in his son's life, but found himself instead sinking to the floor outside the door, back against the wall. The music washed over him like rainfall on parched earth, and for the first time since burying his wife, Angelo Bianchi remembered how to weep. Her playing stopped abruptly, as if she sensed his presence, the silence between notes stretching taut as a tripwire. Angelo held his breath, certain of discovery, but the moment passed. The door remained closed, the secret between them preserved for one more precious night. The moment Angelo decided to reveal himself came unexpectedly, 1 month after his first discovery of the midnight lessons. He stood outside the music room, hand poised on the door handle, listening to his son play a piece Elise had composed herself, a lullaby that had died with her, or so he'd believed. "You're playing it too fast." Nora's voice drifted through the gap in the door, gentle but firm in her guidance. "Remember what we said about patience. Music isn't a race to the finish line. It's a journey to be savored with every note." Theodore's laugh, clear and unburdened, struck Angelo like physical pain, a sound he hadn't heard since before the funeral. "Mom used to say the same thing," the boy replied, his fingers slowing obediently on the keys. "She said rushing music is like gulping down ice cream instead of letting it melt on your tongue." The parallel between his late wife's words and this stranger's teaching froze Angelo in place, the uncanny resemblance too perfect to be coincidence. Perhaps this woman had researched Elise, studied her methods to manipulate her way into their lives, yet the genuine warmth in her voice contradicted such calculated deception. "My daughter Sophie asks why I come home so late," Nora confessed, as Theodore practiced the corrected tempo. "I tell her I'm helping someone find their music again, and she says that makes the extra hours worth it. Children understand sacrifice better than we think." Angelo leaned closer to the door, absorbing this new information like a detective gathering evidence. The woman had a daughter, was sacrificing time with her own child to teach his, not the action of someone with ulterior motives, unless the deception ran deeper than he imagined. "Will you play something your mom used to play?" Theodore asked, his small hands stilling on the keys. "I like how you sound different but the same, like you're speaking the same language with a different accent." Nora hesitated, then began playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, the notes rising and falling like moonlight on water. Her technique wasn't perfect. Angelo could hear the slight hesitation in her left hand, the legacy of her injury, but the emotion transcended technical precision. Outside the door, Angelo closed his eyes, transported to evenings in the penthouse when Elise played this very piece, while Theodore drifted to sleep in his arms. The memory was so vivid he could almost feel his son's weight against his chest, smell the baby shampoo in his hair. "Your mother played at Carnegie Hall once," Nora told Theodore, her voice soft with reverence as the final notes faded. "I was in the audience that night. I'd never heard anyone make music breathe the way she did, like each note was alive and had a story to tell." The revelation hit Angelo like a physical blow. This wasn't some random cleaner who happened to play piano, but someone who had actually known Elise's music, perhaps even Elise herself. The coincidence seemed too perfect, almost orchestrated by some force beyond his understanding. "Dad has a recording of that concert," Theodore confided, his voice dropping to a whisper. He plays it sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep, but I hear him crying. I wish I could help him find his music again, the way you're helping me find mine." Angelo's hand fell from the door handle, a sudden shame washing over him at his son's perception of his grief. He had thought his pain private, his tears hidden, yet Theodore had heard everything: the muffled sobs, the whispered conversations with a ghost, the broken promises to a wife who would never return. Paolo's voice in his earpiece shattered the moment. "Boss, we have a situation downstairs that requires your attention." Angelo stepped back, conflicted between duty and desire. The mafia leader battling with the father who wanted nothing more than to burst through the door and embrace his son. "I'll be back tomorrow," he whispered to the closed door, a promise to himself rather than the occupants who couldn't hear him. As he walked away, the music followed him down the corridor like a thread connecting him to something he had believed forever lost. The confrontation Paolo had been pushing for happened on a Tuesday afternoon, when Nora arrived for her regular cleaning shift, only to find security waiting. The head guard, apologetic but firm, escorted her to the service elevator with her belongings in a cardboard box, terminated without explanation, without warning. "There must be some mistake," she protested, mind racing through possible discoveries. The unauthorized access to the music room, the lessons with Theodore, the keys she'd duplicated. Each transgression alone merited firing, but the timing suggested something more sinister at work. The security guard avoided her eyes, uncomfortable with his role in this drama. "Orders from management, ma'am. Apparently there were complaints about missing items on the 20th floor, he muttered, the lie obvious in his inability to meet her gaze. What Nora didn't know was that Angelo had been called away on urgent business across the country, unaware of Paolo's decision to remove the security threat in his absence. The underboss had seized the opportunity to eliminate what he perceived as weakness in his leader's household. Upstairs, Theodore waited in the music room at their usual time, fingers tracing the piano keys without pressing them, listening for footsteps that would not come. The minutes stretched into hours as the boy sat alone in darkness, both literal and figurative, the silence around him growing heavier with each passing moment. When Mrs. Green finally found him, his cheeks were wet with tears he couldn't explain. How could he tell her about secret lessons, about the woman who had brought color back into his world of eternal night? "She promised she'd come," was all he said, over and over, as she led him back to the penthouse. Angelo returned 3 days later to find his son transformed, the brief blossoming crushed beneath renewed silence. Theodore's fingers no longer dancing across breakfast tables and armrests as they had in recent weeks. The boy ate mechanically, answered in monosyllables, and requested to be alone with increasing frequency. "He's been like this since Tuesday," Mrs. Green reported with genuine concern, her affection for Theodore evident in the worry lines creasing her forehead. "It's like someone switched off a light inside him. He won't even go near the piano in the living room." The dossier on his desk that evening contained the answer. Security footage showing Nora's termination, Paolo's signature on the paperwork, the cardboard box containing her personal effects. The timestamps confirmed it had happened mere hours after Angelo left town, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Fury rose in him like a tide, cold and implacable rather than hot and reckless. Paolo had overstepped, had made decisions affecting Angelo's son without consultation or approval, an unforgivable breach in their world, where hierarchy meant everything and family even more. "Find her," Angelo instructed his most trusted associate, sliding Nora's file across his desk. "Bring her to the penthouse tomorrow evening. No force, no threats, just an invitation she can't refuse," he specified, knowing his reputation alone would ensure compliance without necessitating crude intimidation. Meanwhile, in her apartment across town, Nora stared at the stack of bills with growing desperation. Rent due in a week, Sophie's piano lesson payment already late, and now her primary income gone without explanation or recourse. The termination had come with no severance, no unemployment eligibility due to the fabricated theft accusation. Sophie practiced scales in the background, determined despite their circumstances, each note a reminder of what Nora had lost twice now. First her career, and now the connection to Theodore, a child who had somehow begun healing wounds she thought permanent. "Music finds a way," she whispered to herself, touching the worn bracelet that had become both talisman and torture device. The question that haunted her now was whether she could find a way to survive until the music returned, or if this time the silence would be permanent. The knock on her door the following evening carried the weight of finality. Bill collectors, perhaps. Or worse, the landlord come to begin eviction proceedings. Instead, she found a man in an impeccable suit, his car double-parked outside with diplomatic plates, an envelope in his extended hand. The penthouse elevator opened directly into Angelo's private foyer, where Nora stood frozen between fear and defiance. The luxury surrounding her, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, priceless art, confirmed everything she had suspected about Theodore's father, but never dared ask the boy directly. "Ms. Williams," Angelo's voice preceded his appearance, stepping from shadows into light with the controlled grace of a predator. "Thank you for accepting my invitation, though we both know it wasn't really a request you could decline." Despite the implicit threat, Nora found herself studying the man rather than cowering, noting the resemblance to Theodore in the shape of his eyes, the slight tension around his mouth suggesting he was as uncomfortable with this meeting as she was. Power cloaked him like an expensive suit, yet grief had left visible marks beneath the tailored exterior. "If this is about the music room, I accept full responsibility," she began, chin lifting slightly in the same gesture Sophie used when preparing to face consequences for broken rules. "Theodore should not be punished for my decisions." Angelo's laugh surprised them both, short and genuine, rusty from disuse like a door hinge rarely moved. "My son has been punished enough by life without me adding to his burdens," he replied, gesturing for her to follow him deeper into the apartment, past rooms that whispered of wealth beyond comprehension. They stopped before a closed door, Angelo's hand resting on the handle with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Before you meet him again, you should know everything," he said, voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "About who I am, about what happened to his mother, about why your dismissal was never my intention." The room beyond the door was unlike the rest of the penthouse, a music studio with perfect acoustics, walls lined with photographs of a beautiful woman at various pianos across the world's great stages. In the center stood a grand piano that Nora recognized immediately, a Bosendorfer Imperial, the same model Elise had played at Carnegie Hall. "Your wife was Elise Bianchi," Nora breathed, pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. "I didn't connect Theodore to her because of the different last name you use in the building, but I should have recognized her touch in his playing. The same intuitive phrasing, the natural rubato." Angelo nodded, tracing the piano's edge with reverent fingertips. "For protection, we use my mother's maiden name here. In my world, anonymity is a luxury more valuable than the penthouse itself," he explained, the admission of his dangerous life hanging between them unspoken yet understood. "The accident that took her wasn't an accident," he continued after a painful silence, each word extracted like a bullet from flesh. "It was meant for me. Rivals who discovered my weakness, who knew hurting her would destroy me more effectively than any bullet." Nora sank onto the piano bench, memories of newspaper headlines suddenly recontextualized, the celebrated pianist's tragic death in a car bombing, the theories about terrorist connections given her international performances. The truth had been buried beneath layers of influence and misdirection, the powerful protecting their secrets, even in grief. Theodore was with her that day. Angelo's voice broke on his son's name, hands gripping the piano to steady himself. The blast spared his life, but took his sight. The final cruelty of a fate that already robbed him of his mother. Punishment for sins that were never his. The weight of this revelation pressed against Nora's chest like physical pain, understanding now the layers of loss in Theodore's careful movements, in his desperate connection to music as the last bridge to his mother. Not just a blind child, but one whose darkness had come violently, whose last visual memory would be unimaginable horror. "When I saw you teaching him, I wanted to hate you for trespassing on sacred ground," Angelo admitted, his controlled facade cracking further with each confession. "For touching what wasn't yours to touch, for awakening what I had painfully put to rest, not just in him, but in me." He turned to her fully now, vulnerability transforming his features from intimidating to merely human. "But how could I hate the person who gave my son back his laughter? Who taught him that blindness doesn't mean darkness, that loss doesn't mean ending?" The door opened before Nora could respond, Theodore standing in the threshold with Mrs. Green hovering anxiously behind him. The boy's head tilted, nostrils flaring slightly as he processed the scents in the room. His father's cologne, the lemon polish of the piano, and something else that made his face transform with disbelieving hope. "Nora," he whispered, her name both question and prayer on his lips. "Dad found you? You came back?" Each question tumbled forth with increasing urgency, his small body vibrating with emotion too big for its container. Angelo knelt before his son, taking small hands in his larger ones with surprising gentleness. "I should have told you sooner that I knew about your lessons," he said, voice thick with regret. "That I watched you play, that I heard how she was teaching you your mother's songs. I was afraid of what it meant, of changes I wasn't ready to face." The boy's unseeing eyes filled with tears, bottom lip trembling with the effort of containing feelings too complex for his 9 years. "You weren't mad? You aren't going to make her leave again?" he asked, the questions revealing how deeply he had feared discovery, how certain he had been of punishment. "Your mother once told me that when you find someone who speaks your heart's language, you don't let them go," Angelo replied, glancing up at Nora with an expression that transcended employer and employee, that hinted at possibilities neither had dared consider. "I forgot that lesson until I heard you playing together, until I remembered what it means to find harmony in discord." The three of them formed a triangle of broken pieces somehow fitting together. The widow, the widower, the child who connected them through loss and music. The moment stretched between them, fragile as a piano string, vibrating with potential energy that could either create music or snap under tension. "Sophie has a recital next week," Nora found herself saying, the invitation forming before conscious thought. "She's playing Chopin, not perfectly, but with her whole heart," she added, thinking of her daughter practicing relentlessly on their worn upright, determined despite their circumstances. Theodore's face lit with immediate interest, turning toward his father with unspoken question. "We would be honored to attend," Angelo answered for them both, his hand moving unconsciously to rest on his son's shoulder. The first casual touch Nora had witnessed between them, a bridge being cautiously rebuilt. Outside the studio windows, night fell over the city they each navigated so differently. Angelo from heights secured by power and fear, Nora from depths carved by struggle and sacrifice, Theodore from darkness illuminated by sound rather than sight. Their paths should never have crossed, yet here they stood at an unexpected intersection of 3 roads. Sophie stood backstage at the community center, anxiety making her small hands tremble as she peeked through the curtain at the half-filled auditorium. The monthly student recital rarely drew large crowds, mostly parents obligated to attend. Her second-hand dress, carefully pressed by Nora that morning, hung slightly loose on her thin frame, a thrift store find chosen for its similarity to concert attire she'd seen in her mother's old photographs. The costume of a life they had once lived, now reduced to play acting. "Mom, what if I forget the middle section?" she whispered, the familiar pre-performance jitters amplified by the knowledge that they couldn't afford to continue lessons if her scholarship wasn't renewed. Each note needed to be perfect. Nora knelt to straighten her daughter's collar, heart aching at the pressure Sophie placed on herself. "Music isn't memory, it's feeling," she reminded her, the same words she had told Theodore. "If you forget a note, find one that feels right." The auditorium door opened, drawing Sophie's attention back to the gap in the curtain, her eyes widening as she registered the newcomers. "Mom," she hissed, tugging Nora's sleeve with sudden urgency. "There's a man in a suit fancier than Mr. Peterson's funeral clothes." Nora felt her heartbeat accelerate as she glimpsed Angelo and Theodore, being escorted to seats in the front row, the Mafia boss looking distinctly out of place among the working-class parents in casual attire. His presence transformed the humble recital into something momentous. Sophie performed third in the program, her small figure dwarfed by the upright piano on stage. From where Nora stood in the wings, she could see Angelo leaning forward slightly, his attention absolute in a way that spoke of genuine interest rather than polite obligation. The Chopin nocturne began hesitantly, Sophie's initial nerves evident in the tentative first phrases. But as the music progressed, something remarkable happened. The child seemed to forget herself in the piece, her body relaxing into the emotional current. Theodore's head tilted toward the stage, his expression one of intense concentration, fingers moving slightly in his lap, as if playing along invisibly. The connection between the children, one performing, one listening, transcended their differences in circumstance. When Sophie reached the difficult middle section, she faltered briefly, a wrong note interrupting the flow. But instead of panicking, she paused for the briefest moment, then found her way back into the piece with an improvised transition that honored Chopin's intentions. The audience applauded politely when she finished, but Theodore's response was exuberant, standing to clap with uninhibited enthusiasm that drew attention from nearby parents. Angelo placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, not to restrain his joy, but to guide it. Afterward, in the reception area where punch and cookies rewarded young performers, Angelo approached with Theodore at his side, and an unexpected proposal. "Ms. Williams, I'd like to offer you a position," he stated without preamble, his directness at odds with the social niceties. "I'm establishing a foundation in my wife's name, the Elise Bianchi Foundation for Musical Education," he continued, handing her an embossed business card with details of something that had not existed a week ago. "We need a director with both performance background and teaching ability." Nora stared at the card, mind racing to process the implications. Salary figures that would transform their lives, benefits that included housing in the building where she had recently scrubbed floors, and most incredibly, a scholarship program with Sophie listed as the first recipient. "This isn't charity," Angelo added, correctly interpreting her hesitation as pride rather than disinterest. "It's investment in something my wife valued above all else, finding and nurturing talent regardless of background, creating opportunities where circumstances have created obstacles." 3 months later, the Elise Bianchi Foundation occupied the entire 20th floor of the building. The former music room expanded into a series of teaching studios, practice rooms, and a small recital hall. Children from diverse backgrounds filled the space each afternoon. Nora moved through the controlled chaos with newfound authority, her cleaning uniform replaced by professional attire that still felt foreign against her skin. The transition from service worker to executive had been disorienting, her imposter syndrome flaring each time someone addressed her as Director Williams. What kept her grounded was the teaching, 2 hours each day reserved for direct instruction, including Theodore's lessons, which continued with Angelo's blessing and occasional attendance. These moments at the piano remained sacred space where only the music mattered. The Foundation's inaugural concert approached rapidly, pressure mounting as Angelo invited influential figures from both the legitimate business world and his other sphere of influence. The event would either establish the Foundation's credibility or mark it as a wealthy man's vanity project. "I can't do it," Theodore declared during their lesson, hands balled into fists after struggling with a particularly challenging passage. "Everyone will be watching. What if I make a mistake and embarrass Dad?" The fear in his voice revealed not just performance anxiety but deeper worry. Nora placed her hands over his, feeling the tension vibrating through his small frame. "When you play, who are you playing for?" she asked, the question cutting through his panic to the heart of what music had always meant to both of them. Theodore's breathing slowed as he considered her words, his unseeing eyes turned inward to something only he could visualize. "For Mom," he whispered finally, fingers uncurling from tight fists to rest gently on the keys. "And for myself, to remember that darkness can still have beautiful sounds." "Then that's your audience. Not the people in the hall, not your father's associates, not even me," Nora affirmed, guiding him back to the opening bars of the piece. "Play for the people who live in your heart, and everyone else will simply be privileged to overhear something not meant for them." In the adjacent studio, Sophie worked with a renowned pianist Angelo had brought from Vienna to mentor the scholarship students, her progress accelerating with access to proper instruction and a quality instrument. The two children had formed an immediate connection despite their differences. The night of the concert arrived with unexpected complications, Paolo appearing at the penthouse unannounced, his displeasure at Angelo's recent business decisions evident in his aggressive stance and barely concealed contempt. "You've gone soft," he accused, gesturing toward the tuxedo. Angelo's response was measured, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that had once made him feared throughout the city. "The Foundation secures our legacy in ways guns and territory never could," he replied, straightening his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "My son performs tonight." Downstairs, the concert hall filled with an unlikely mixture of socialites, musicians, critics, and men whose bulges beneath tailored jackets suggested weapons rather than fashion accessories. The worlds Angelo navigated separately were colliding tonight, a risky convergence for Theodore's sake. Nora peered through the curtain, anxiety climbing as she recognized faces from newspaper society pages mingling with others whose photographs more commonly appeared in crime reports. The Foundation's future rested on impressing both audiences tonight, proving to benefactors their money was well spent. The program progressed smoothly through performances by various students, each showcasing different aspects of the Foundation's work. Young virtuosos who needed only opportunity, children from underserved communities discovering music for the first time, and those with various challenges. When Theodore took the stage, the audience fell silent with the peculiar hush reserved for moments recognized as significant before they even unfold. The small boy navigated to the piano without assistance, his confidence in the space evident in his measured steps and straight posture. The foundation's success over the following year transformed not just the lives of its students, but the building itself, which gradually shifted from luxury residence to cultural landmark. Wealthy families now sought apartments there, specifically for proximity to the program. Paolo's growing resentment festered beneath a veneer of compliance, his loyalty to Angelo increasingly undermined by what he perceived as weakness. The underboss watched with calculating eyes as his leader spent more time with the foundation and less with traditional business. The confrontation became inevitable when Angelo began discussions about legitimate investment opportunities, moving portions of their operation into legal enterprises. "This isn't what your father built," Paolo argued during a tense meeting, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of ambition. "My father is dead, and so is the world he built in," Angelo responded. Photographs of Theodore's recent performance displayed prominently on his desk beside traditional family business ledgers. "We adapt or we die, and I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes." What Angelo didn't share was how music had reconstructed his understanding of power, that true strength lay not in being feared, but in creating something worth protecting. Theodore's transformation had mirrored his own, both learning to navigate darkness through other means. The warning came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Green, who overheard Paolo on a phone call in the penthouse while Angelo was at the foundation. "He's planning something against the music woman," she reported nervously, years of service overcoming her reluctance to involve herself. Angelo's response was immediate and comprehensive. Security protocols activated throughout the building, trusted men positioned near Nora and Sophie's apartment, and a direct confrontation with Paolo scheduled for that evening. The foundation had become family, and threats against family were unforgivable. Nora remained unaware of the danger, focused on preparations for Theodore and Sophie's first duet performance, a piece they had composed together, combining classical structure with improvisational elements. The collaboration represented everything the foundation stood for. When Paolo arrived for their meeting, he found Angelo in the music studio rather than his office, a deliberate choice of battlefield that immediately disadvantaged the underboss, who shifted uncomfortably in this unfamiliar territory. The grand piano dominated the space between them. "You once told me that my son was a weakness enemies could exploit," Angelo began, running his fingers lightly across piano keys without pressing them. "You were right, but not in the way you meant. He reminded me that being human isn't weakness. It's the only strength worth having." Paolo's hand moved toward his jacket, a motion Angelo anticipated with the calm certainty of someone who had navigated violence his entire life. "Before you make your next decision, understand that I've prepared for this moment since you first moved against Nora without my authorization." The tableau held for an excruciating moment. Paolo calculating odds that diminished with each second, Angelo offering the silent choice between graceful exit and forced removal. The resolution came not through violence but surrender, Paolo's hand moving away from his concealed weapon. "You'll leave tonight. Arrangements have been made for operations in the Western Territory that need experienced leadership," Angelo stated, the directive framed as opportunity rather than exile. "Your loyalty to the old ways is valuable there, where tradition still matters more than innovation." After Paolo's departure, Angelo found himself alone in the studio, surrounded by instruments that had once been foreign objects, and now felt like extensions of his evolving identity. He sat at the piano, placing his hands in positions he'd watched Nora teach Theodore. The sound that emerged was hesitant, imperfect, but undeniably music, a first step on a journey he had never expected to take. Like his son, he was learning to navigate by touch rather than sight, to trust in processes whose outcomes couldn't be controlled through intimidation. When Nora found him there, still practicing the same simple progression an hour later, something shifted between them, the final barrier of employer and employee dissolving into something more complex and honest. "Your hand position needs adjustment," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is important for me to continue creating here.